Nation in Conversation is proudly brought to you by AFGRI, NGET, Grain SA, John Deere, Monsanto, Nedbank and Senves.
Welcome to Nation in Conversation, here from the Nampo Harvest Day. I'm Theo Foster. Please follow us on Twitter at Nation Converse, or you can download the Nation in Conversation app. It is available on the App Store. You can follow news, the program, what we are going to say on the Nation in Conversation website, nationinconversation.co.za. Today we are going to talk about the role or the size of agriculture within the South African GDP. In the mid-1950s, agriculture made up about 15% of the GDP. In the mid-60s, this was lowered to about 10%. Today it's around about 2.5%. And we're going to talk about the size of agriculture in the GDP, the linkages, the effect, but also what is the importance of agriculture, not necessarily in the GDP, but in the rest of the economy. My panel today is Professor Ferdi Meyer. He's the Director of the Bureau for Food and Agriculture Policy, or BFAP. Professor Johan Kirsten, Head of the Department of Agriculture Economics at the University of Pretoria. Professor Nick Fink, Chair, Department of Agriculture Economics at Stellenbosch University. And Mike Schuessler, Director and owner of economist.co.za. Mike, I am going to start with you. GDP, we talk about the GDP and the percentage of GDP and the growth of GDP. What is GDP? What's the term GDP?
Well, what it actually is, in very simple terms, it's a value-added concept. So we would import a car for 100,000 Rand. We would add the tires and the engine to the car, and that adds another 50,000. And then the dealer who sells the car sells it for 180,000. So in the GDP sense, that car, we added 80,000 Rands worth of value in the sum. Now, then the further thing, obviously, is now the person gets finance. That doesn't get added to the 80,000 Rand or sum, that gets added to the banking sector. So it's the value we add. The problem with what value we add is it's a very good concept, but it comes from the last century in about the 1930s when Keynes and so on wrote stuff and people started devising this and we started measuring GDP worldwide in about 1945 odd. And if we take a look today, it's very different sort of things. We're measuring not so much manufacturing and agriculture, but services more and more. And it's very difficult to determine what the value add is. For example, there's a very positive value add when you have your cell phone with you and you can look at the news, and that is free. So we don't measure that.
That's not part of the GDP.
That's not part of the GDP. And we don't measure great sunshine. But at the other end, we also struggle with finding things like the informal sector. We also don't pick up the problems early enough when an industry contracts. There's a host of issues with GDP.
Nick, when we talk about agriculture only being 2.5% of GDP, is that a true reflection?
I think yes. I mean, again, sort of getting back to this notion that GDP is not a very exact number, and it's actually not a very satisfactory number in modern economies. There are people who would say that if you take agriculture and all the linkages that are connected to agriculture, that it actually comes to around about 25%. Some people even say 30%.
But you disagree with that?
But that's no, that's not true. If you measure it, now you have to measure it according to the way in which GDP is measured. Then the total will come to around about between 6 and 7%. But I think the point, and of course what you're measuring is all the inputs that go into farming, so the tractors and the fertilizer and the seed and the chemicals, you've got to measure all that. We also know that people don't eat raw commodities, you've got to add all this processing and that kind of thing. Certain parts of agriculture like the wine industry and the millie industry are very susceptible to tourism. So you've got to add those things to it as well. I'm only joking about the millie industry, right? You've got to add that as well. And if you add all of that together, it'll come to around about between 6 and 7%. But I think we must take this notion seriously that GDP is not actually a satisfactory indication of the importance of a sector, and especially not of a sector like agriculture. And this is something that we've known since the 16th century. He wants to argue with me. It's not the 14th, it's the 16th century.
Okay, so
that's where it starts.
Yeah. So let's take that point. Why do you believe there was 300, 400, 500 years ago a better measurement?
No, it was not a measurement, it was the philosophy of the physiocrats, which was one of the first thinkers of economics, which argue that the only real economic activity is agriculture. But obviously it was the only activity in a way, because it was subsistence production and subsistence nurture, because the only way that people could survive was through production of food, and the creation of value took place through the tilling the soil. So that's where the philosophical notions of the only true economy comes from. But I want to bring in this whole issue of the GDP quickly. There's lots of critique against the measure of GDP. It's often considered to be a one-dimensional notion of how you measure the contribution of a sector, and Nick sort of started to allude to that. And if you start unpacking the contribution of the sector, it goes into several dimensions, which is often unmeasurable.
That's what termed sometimes the linkages.
It's linkages partly, but it's also social contributions. And you need to understand the importance of food in culture. So food production and agriculture per se has an important social and cultural contribution. If you look at the festivities that goes with harvest, the fact that there's a harvest day at Nampo is precisely almost like a festivity around the harvest of the maize. So the many festivities in the small villages in Europe. The poverty role of agriculture. Many people lose their jobs in urban areas and go back to rural areas where it's actually agriculture is a safety net. And then you have the employment role and environmental role. The fact that we can take pictures in the nice winelands where Nick lives is the fact that the farmers cultivated the land, put up the vineyards at their expense, and the tourists benefit for free, in a sense, from that activity. So the contribution can be measured through a range of other dimensions, not only through the GDP.
Ferdi, we started the discussion with GDP going from 15%, 10%, 2.5%. That's an international trend. From your point of view in South Africa, is 2.5% an accurate description of the role of agriculture?
Theo, yeah, I think to add to the debate, it's people are worried that that's a bad thing. That agriculture, we want to fight about it and say, no, it must be more, it must be more. It's a good thing. We want to have an economy.
And that's in line with international modern economies.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Mike, you can talk about this more, but the bottom line is, if we think about employment, for example, we want to, in agriculture, we cannot pay the wages that in your downstream economies where you can pay higher wages. So it's an unskilled, so that's from an employment point of view. But just in terms of the measurements, there are two elements in my view, and that's the one that we can measure, where we already make a mistake. So we know we are under accounting for agriculture. So yes, there's a methodology around, is GDP a good measurement? But before you get to that, we under account for agriculture. And we've seen that in census data versus where you really go and you look, and this is what they did for the Limpopo province. And the underestimation of agriculture value in its purest definition of the real value that you create was 10 billion rand. In Limpopo.
After the break, I'll get to you, Johan. After the break, I want to look at agriculture. This year with the drought, we had the impact on food prices and how that cuts through the South African economy. And I want to then talk about the multipliers and get back to you, Johan. We'll be back right after the break. Welcome back to Nation in Conversation. Johan, we talk about the contribution to GDP, the contribution. And we've heard Mike said GDP is a value-add concept. That 2.3, 2.5%, that's not a true reflection of the contribution.
Yeah, and I think that's what Nick basically indicated just now, and my sort of argument about the other contributions we should also keep in mind. But my biggest fear about the interpretation of the figure, and especially through your introduction, you said the decline from 15% to 2.3%. The interpretation that people in the street gets is that agriculture is declining. And that's a very worrying aspect that we need to guard against. People need to understand that the cake is growing through the economy because of the other sectors that are growing, which is very important for the transformation of the economy. You can't have an economy that is modern without a transformed notion of other sectors that are growing. So the manufacturing sector needs to grow, the services sector needs to grow, finance, etc., so that agriculture has a market. So because the other sectors are growing, your relative share of the GDP is declining. So we must always emphasize the relative notion of that figure.
Mike, if we look at the current drought situation we've had, and I think we've all experienced it in food prices, and if you look at the food inflation, and specifically if you go back to that sector of our economy where food is their major daily expense, where 60-70% of their daily budget is allocated to food, and you look at food inflation based on the one hand a weak currency, but based on the drought, that has a very big impact on the overall economic picture, but also on the stability of the economy vis-a-vis currency, inflation, interest rates, and one can link those to a large extent to the economy.
Yes, one can. I think we must do two things. The drought is a shock, and it is definitely increasing the raw commodity values quite sharply. But here's a way that you can measure agriculture in a different sense. If you go and look at the weights of food and beverages, for example, in the CPI basket, you're talking not 2.5%, you're talking 15%. For poorer people, you're talking
15%.
1.5. But ultimately, because when you get it at the shelf, there's a package that comes with it. There's a marketing that comes with it. There's also the rent that the shopkeeper has to pay. So people have to maintain margins all the way through. And you can see that in South Africa, the margin squeeze on the profitability is on, because the food prices on the PPI side and on the raw material side have shot up dramatically. We have seen big increases in CPI, but nowhere close to the same levels. So the fact that the rent has gone up with 5 or 10% is nowhere close to the 100% increase in the maize price, or whatever the case may be. So that combined effect, when the consumer buys it, means that there's only a 10 or a 15% increase in his basket. It is going to get worse still, I think, on certain products anyway. But the point of the matter is that just shows you what the contribution of agriculture is and how we should look at it, because by the time the consumer buys it, there's many other things added, whether it's imported, whether it's packaging, whether it's the marketing, the branding, etc. And that just shows you the real contribution of agriculture.
Ferdi, real contribution of agriculture, a term that's being used is the multiplier effect. That sounds like a term that academics will devise amongst themselves to make sure the rest of us don't follow the conversation. What is the multiplier effect?
Okay, let's make it very practical, and we link it to the drought story, because that's exactly what it is. So if we have this effect. So this is let's take that's a bread, and that's the amount that wheat has. Let's say, argument's sake, between 20 and 30% of your bread is that wheat value. So now, where does that wheat come from? Is it produced locally, or is that imported? The rest of the value, the multiplier effect, that value remains there. The bakeries remain, the millers remain. So the transporters remain. All of those guys remain. So that's value that's created beyond the farm gate. Now,
if it wasn't for the wheat, that whole value chain would not have existed.
You could have imported the wheat. You can produce it locally or import it. So I'm going to bring the story now to soybeans. Let's think about the value that now comes in the multiplier. I'm going to explain it this way. We've imported 80% of our soybean cake, 90%, that goes into the feed industry. So we have a huge amount of value that's in this sector of feed. But we never had the crushing plants. Now suddenly you have investment going on. There's a profit margin to make. People build a crushing plant. What does a crushing plant do? It kicks back an incentive for soybean farmers to grow more soybeans. Now suddenly you have a multiplier effect. So instead of importing the soybean cake, you've got crushing plants crushing it. That's adding value, like Mike explained right at the start. And then you've got farmers kicking back at the farmer saying, okay, now it makes sense. I've got a crushing plant close to me. I can grow soybeans, because the whole price relationship between soybeans and maize has changed. And those are the multipliers. And it's difficult to measure those, to put a number to it. But if you take an aggregate, it's around about, for every rand that you invest in the primary sector, you get a 2.4 rands going, 2.40 rand going into the before the farm gate and R1.80 going beyond the farm. So it depends on, but that's a very aggregate number.
That's the output multiplier.
Correct.
Then you have the labor multiplier that say every investment or every rand of output creates so much jobs.
Yes. So the principle is you've got this industry, you've got soybean meal. That's your end product that goes into the feed mill. You can actually go beyond. Actually, the chickens are the final product. So you can work it all the way back and say, where does this raw product come from? Do you import it or do you produce it locally?
But I can explain it simpler with a story. If you look at the pond that you passed on the way here, and you throw a stone into that pond, it makes that ripple effect. So the effect of an industry suddenly initiated creates a ripple effect through the rest of the economy. And the size of those ripples is basically the multiplier.
We've heard last week that South Africa's GDP is now the third biggest in Africa. We've been overtaken last year or the year before when Nigeria rebased their statistics. They overtook us. And now during the last few months, we were overtaken by the desert, by Egypt. Which for me it's almost strange to be overtaken by a desert with a few tourist attractions. But that's not the case. Egypt has more than 80 million people, and that's what I want to steer to. Egypt has 82, 83 million people. We've got somewhere around 53 million people. 55. What is the importance of GDP per capita in this respect?
You know, in all respect, I think the best measurement that we could have is a per capita measurement. Because right now, all the economists have got growth below 1%. In fact, I'm the most negative, and I've got a
We're going to get to that in the last section.
I'm just saying, no matter which economist you go to, if the population which is growing at 1.7%, and you've got even the most optimistic one, Treasury, 0.9%, we are going to get poorer. We're going to feel poorer.
Per individual.
Per individual. And that's, I think, the real measurement that we should be looking at.
We'll be back right after the break. Welcome back to Nation in Conversation. From an agricultural point, and I want to start with you, Ferdi. If you look at the South African environment from an agriculture point, how would you describe it?
Yeah, Theo, so I think it's not a secret, you know, that, and we went through this exercise very recently again, looking at where's growth, where can agriculture still provide the growth? And immediately, if you talk to the companies, that comes up as one of they are like three critical factors. The one, and we specifically looked at high-value commodities that we can export, or the vulnerable industries, like your chickens, like your wheat industries, where we're seeing a decline or a lot of pressure. And your comments are always the same. Politically, they're worried the investment doesn't flow, so that was one of the issues raised. The second one is trade barriers, non-tariff trade barriers, or it's just simple paperwork not being signed, not having that support. They want to grow, but it's not there. And the third one is just availability of water and the cost of electricity and labor. So those were the three critical drivers that we picked up, and I think here amongst ourselves we know this. These are the key the factors, and we need to think about it saying, okay, so this is the reality around political environment. What do we do with this within this environment? Saying, are there opportunities of growth? What are the actions that we need to take as an industry and taking government along?
Yeah, I think it's very important, maybe just to add to that, the investment decision of any entrepreneur depends on certainty, certainty that there would be a return, and that return depends on your policy certainty and political stability. And I think we in South Africa are now faced with lots of political uncertainties and so on, which therefore creates a problem of more investment, lower growth, etc. So I think we're very concerned. And that links me back to the water story, because Ferdi neglected to mention, Nick as well, that in the National Development Plan, to grow the agricultural sector, the investment in irrigation infrastructure, more dams, more water available for agriculture, is an important driver of greater agricultural growth.
I think if I look at agriculture, I think the value add that we can get for the country in total, when we look at the whole production chain, is going to go away from the sort of commoditized agricultural products to specialized agricultural products. And one can use the wine industry, one could use pecan nuts, one could use macadamia nuts. We're finding a lot of places in South Africa that are moving into places where they add value. They take the nuts, they add different nuts together, or We do. We add.
And we talk about nuts, not about economists.
Yeah, well, better. You know, the people that are better decision makers than economists are people who have to make a decision about their own future and their own income and their own profitability.
Exactly.
And as a small businessman, I can tell you, you do not want to be the 50th person with the same product to go to see someone. You want to go for something unique, and that is where we can add the value right through the food chain, and we have Africa just north of us that is waiting for our product. I think it's an opportunity that we can uncover, but we have to create that certainty.
Mike, your view on where the current economic environment is. I know you are one of the more pessimistic analysts, given the specific sectors that you believe are not in the shape they should be. Your view?
Well, let's put it this way. I was always the optimistic one, and I think the way I saw the commodity super cycle go just made me very worried. And in that context, the sort of fights that we're having and the backroom scenes that we don't know about in our government at the moment is increasing the uncertainty, is increasing the risks. During the commodity cycle at the moment, our profitability of the economy is going down. So our profits are not compensating for that increase in risk, to put it very, very plainly. We probably did not pick up the increase in unemployment last year because the master sample changed. The questions and stuff also changed slightly. With that meant that we didn't get a nice trend analysis on the unemployment side. Now where we are now, we're finding that there's a huge jump in the first quarter of unemployment. This is a very, very big problem. We are marching towards 10 million people being unemployed. We are at 8.9 million. We are, in every sense, that is a political catastrophic event. Any country in the world will see it as such. Yet here, the focus at the moment of the ruling party is internal. It is fighting amongst itself. This is not good for us. So I really do not see where the general economic growth comes to that. Add the drought shock, add the low commodity prices, add the slowing economy worldwide, and you've got a recipe for a disaster at the moment.
Let me start with your view on the economy going forward, Johan.
Yeah, I think Mike has actually mentioned everything that is important. The predictions that I have is around 0.4% growth. We are probably not in negative growth yet, but we have been declining the positive growth over the last few quarters. So obviously it doesn't look good, and the rating agencies have given us some chance. Whether this political turmoil that you've referred to now is going to change that is quite worrying. So I think that is, in my mind, I think Mike has actually summarized it perfectly.
Nick, where does that leave agriculture?
Let me sort of start at the broader end of it. Is that the one thing I've learned in studying economies is what goes down will come up again. So we're in trouble now, but it's not going to last for too long, hopefully. Agriculture is, I think, in a sense, immune to the general economic circumstances. Obviously, people have to buy food, and if they don't have money, then agriculture is in trouble. But specifically because of what we said earlier, the food component of what people buy is relatively small. And so there's always a market for agricultural products. And farmers are used to the fact that when prices go down, they have to produce more in order to maintain their incomes. And when prices go up, they also produce more so they can make more profits. So, recessions are things that don't affect them as badly as what they do other parts of the economy. It's not to say they're not affected, but the relative impact is smaller.
Ferdi, if you look at this environment and you heard what people were saying, from an agricultural investment point of view, your view?
Now, so the reality, we talked about the reality, what it is. Nick has already started to point into the direction what goes down has to come up. So what do the clever people tell us about investment? When do you invest? You invest when it's at the lowest. And again, comes down to the rules of the game. If we can have some certainty, and this is where everybody has to play a role. And I think this is probably, in my view, I think South Africa is going to come out of this event different than what we went into this event.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a great discussion. I think you put GDP into perspective, and the fact that agriculture is only 2.3% of GDP doesn't mean a hell of a lot in the bigger scheme. Thank you very much. Thank you for Nation in Conversation. Please, you can follow us on Twitter, Nation Converse, or you can visit the website, nationinconversation.co.za. You're also welcome to download our app. It is available in the App Store. From me, Theo Foster, good day.
Nation in Conversation is proudly brought to you by Agri, NJ, Grain SA, John Deere, Monsanto, Nedbank and Senves.
First question.
Yes, Theo, I've got actually two questions. The first one is the real effect of agriculture for me is what happens if you take out agriculture out of the economy. So my question perhaps, what will happen if we take out primary production out of South Africa? And if you take that to the Cape, what will happen if you take out wheat production out of Cape? What will happen if you take out poultry production out of South Africa? Because you can buy that cheaper, you can import that cheaper from outside. The next question is the importance of agriculture. In the panel's view, what will be the biggest benefit to South Africa? To give a state warrant or a government warrant to SAA worth 450 billion odd, or to give drought relief to the agricultural sector of between 8 and 12 billion rands?
Let's start with who would like, Mike.
I think it's a very good question because if we look at agriculture, the one thing what will happen is if we didn't have it, our import bill would rise because we still need food. And it would make us far less competitive. We would have a currency that falls again. That is certain. And then I think we've got to add on certain things to that. Johan was talking about the 800,000 people employed in agriculture. You know, that is, well, let's make it about 6% of our people that are employed. So it's not maybe that much, but it will add 800,000, and then you are at that 10 million unemployed if that were to happen. So I think it's very clear that agriculture is very, very important. And as I said before, I think we've got to rethink the whole way who we subsidize, because at SAA we have 10,000 well-paid people that are employed, and they do get subsidies all the time. We also subsidize the motor industry. So in my view, and I really think it's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but it's a very true way of looking at it, the multiplier effect of a primary industry that you support is much, much better for the economy. So if we find ways of supporting it, whether it is branding, whether it is helping to find those agricultural export markets, putting the water and stuff in place, plus perhaps some real money, monetary support for times of drought and that type of stuff, would make a very, very big difference to the stability of the country, the risk that the country faces, not just the farming sector, and certainly to employment creation. It would be very much more positive to employment creation.
I think that links to what we were saying in your session. Your next session is, as long as agriculture is a us and them debate, these things are going to be very difficult, but yes.
But I think the question that was posed is probably the one that I always pose to my students to make them start thinking about what the importance of agriculture.
So it is a difficult question.
It's a trick question. So I answer the question always to them and say, but the farmers have decided to go on strike. And I usually do it in the beginning of the year, so the strike date is usually 31st of March. And every farmer is not going to deliver one pit of maize, 1 liter of milk, no carcass, and we're going to dry the country of food. And then they look at me and say, sure, how are you going to do that? I say, no, we're going to force it. Farmers are not going to deliver. We're going to show the importance of agriculture. So that's a way of looking at it as well.
Well, to you, I don't have any doubt. If you take out agriculture, we have a collapse in the rural economies.
Yeah, that's very important.
We know that. So if we don't have agriculture, the rural economies are not going to grow. We take out the whole social, we haven't even started talking about the social support mechanism that farmers deliver in the rural economies. Apart from the, and we farm ourselves, so I know. It's the product yet you deliver and that you sell is maybe half of the value of that farm unit that you deliver in terms of the society. Whether it's taking kids to school, whether it's supporting the rugby club, whether it's, I mean, we can mention all these things that are not being measured, what agriculture plays a role. Now it comes back to what do you support and what do you don't support. I mean, and what you try to do is to support it as optimally as possible. And there you can make a distinction. We can make a distinction between what's vulnerable, where do we have maybe not the competitive advantage globally, yes, and we are at the back foot in terms of competition for imports coming in, like the wheat industry, like chickens, or the alternative, and it's not either or, it's actually both, is where do you have the opportunity for growth? And that's in the export industries where we can export the value. And you need to look at a balanced view at both. And maybe the shift also, well, let me stop there. I mean, then
I think I just wanted to make the point about the local economy thing, because I forgot to mention it during the session, is agriculture is so critical for most of our rural towns. If agriculture is dead, there's no local town, because there's no fundamental economy. And some people don't understand that dimension. I'm also involved in the SKA expropriation of land debate there in the Karoo. And the way that people at DST and the SKA thinks is that the town will continue if we take 150,000 hectares out of the production system. The abattoir fails, the next store fails, so the negative multiplier impact on local communities of agriculture being taken out is so critical. You can see how that has changed many other local towns where agriculture has been removed.
I just want to go back to the second part of the question, and that is where should one put the subsidies? One thing we must never forget is that we had an era up until the mid-1980s where agriculture was fairly heavily subsidized. And most of the growth that we've had has taken place since we got rid of the subsidies. So this is not an argument against subsidies, it's an argument for smart subsidies. We can't do it the way that we used to do it. We have to find better ways of doing it.
I'd just like to say, we're thinking of food, but think of the forestry sector that's also part of agriculture. There would be no paper factory, for example. There would be no furniture factories in South Africa. If you look at tobacco, that also has an important impact as well. So these are not politically correct things necessarily about the tobacco, but there's even price indexes for what they call non-food agricultures, whether it's cotton or forestry products. And something like lumber is really difficult to take across. It's one of the things that makes China more expensive in some cases, is that they have to import lumber from places like New Zealand and Canada. And that gives us here and there a bit of an advantage in the paper field, for example.
Thank you very much. I'm from Agri-SA. Somebody have said at the Woordfeest, and I couldn't remember who the guy was it, and he says one thing what is very important for me, and I wonder whether it got the attention that it needed to. And he says that the uncertainty in agriculture is a bigger threat than the current drought. And I think from a perspective of a farmer, which I am, this is really for me a concern. Is how long this uncertainty in terms of a lot of issues gonna be with us, and the drought we know it will some other time will go over, and we as farmers will perhaps get through it. But how long do we have to live and farm in this uncertain issues in the country?
My response to that is I agree. I think that's quite true. We spoke quite a bit about the uncertainty. It's not only political uncertainty. There are commodity cycle uncertainties. There are global uncertainties. There's a whole wide world out there. But I think in our circumstances right now, what's happening in the politics of the country is creating a lot of uncertainty. And it's not as if it's all going to blow over after the election in 3 months' time. I think normally, one expects people to start going half crazy at election time, but then afterwards it sort of normalizes. I don't think it's going to happen this time.
I think there's one way that you can create certainty, quite frankly, very quickly. If 95 or 96% of the people that want land do not take the land and take the money, then just add a rule that says from now on, we will give you the money, because that's the case. And then everybody who has a farm has certainty. It's as simple as that. And we will be able to do that, son. So if you then also still want a farm, you get the money, you can go and buy a farm. And we've got to look at it in a modern context and how we get there. And, you know, there have been cases where the Maoris in New Zealand had also land claims, and that was settled within a short period of time. It took them 20 years to get everything sorted from the start, where they said they'll do something, but they immediately created certainty. They said to people, we will give you money, and that's the way that they did it.
Dirk Hanekom from Agriol Africa. Thank you to the panel. My question is, if we listen to you and trying to find positives, Mike, you referred to it, I think so did Nick, and well, all of you did. It's very scarce to find them. The one thing that you did mention that attracted my attention was the fact that you said that in Africa, we sit with a growth in the agricultural sector of more or less 5%. My question is, why don't we leverage more on this growth? We know that Africa needs management skills. They need people to bring specific services to this environment. And I'm convinced that our own economy can benefit a lot more. Do you agree with this statement? And if you do agree, how do you see we engage them further?
Can I start this time?
Yes.
Okay. I think in the first place, we are going into Africa, the agricultural sector, boots and all. Africa has already become the biggest destination for South African agricultural exports. It overtook Europe quite a long time ago, almost 10 years ago. So it's a massive market for us. When we talk about the African market, what we must be very careful about is distinguishing between the countries that are physically on our borders. So that's the 4 small countries, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Swaziland, but then also Zimbabwe and Mozambique. About 75% of our agricultural exports that go into Africa go into those 6 countries. And that's a proportion that stayed fairly stable over the last decade. And if it does change, it's going to take quite a long time to change. So it's only 25% that goes beyond that. Of course, the spearhead of what goes beyond that is ShopRite. We all know that. But then the South African banks, other service providers, the banking sector, television, all of these guys, they also tend to go into the rest of Africa almost to the same extent as what they go into the neighboring countries. But it's a stepwise process. It really is happening. We sometimes wonder why more of our industries don't go in, not necessarily to go and produce, but to provide advice and so on. If you think about the continent of Africa, there's no country in Africa apart from South Africa that has a modern poultry industry. So that, you know, that's the kind of thing which is open for influence from our guys. And I can give you lots of other examples like that. And we sometimes wonder why we don't see more of that. But I think it's a question of time. People seeing the opportunities and doing it. We've been doing quite a lot of it, and it's been very successful.
And maybe just the opportunities to define those more clearly. I think you need to be smart and understand the consumption market there. Just to give you a quick example, Zambia, for example. Zambian wheat production, and our companies, a lot of the center pivots running there, mechanization, skills, storage, a lot of things came from here. But it has grown very fast, and now Zambia is a surplus producer, or basically just providing enough wheat for their own market and maybe a little bit across the border. But it's just way too expensive to transport it further. So transportation in Africa is still not good, and it's a pro and a con. So you need to figure out how big is your local market and go for that. But beyond that, if you need to start to transport, Africa's not there yet. So we need to get the transportation and those things going, but there's a clear opportunity to invest in the value chain and make sure which one you're investing in, where's your offtake market. So Zambia's done that. So they've expanded also wheat, they've expanded maize to 3 million tons. They're exporting, they took away our Zimbabwean market because they've got a non-GM white. So they've pushed us out in Zimbabwe, but now taking a deep sea, they're not competitive yet. We can do deep sea out of Durban, but they can service all our traditional white maize markets in their surrounding areas. So be very specific. There are great opportunities. And sorry, the economic growth is very skewed. It's very specific. and the urban areas are growing. So one needs to figure out where's the opportunity.
Mike, your comment, and make it a final comment on a positive note.
I'll make it a positive note. I do work for the Road Freight Association, and it's one of the growing areas. But you're right, the roads aren't always there and so on. But there are quick turnarounds. We could, for example, have a one border place with our customs union. That would make sure that the speed into Swaziland, Lesotho, Namibia and Botswana, we could then add a Mozambique, because in many agricultural products also go rotten. So you need speed. And those are the sort of things that we need to think about and do it cleverly. And there are certainly opportunities. The one thing about Africa, Africa's not one country, it's many countries, and some of them are doing badly. And in some countries, some places, I was explained by somebody else who knows more than this, but northern Zambia this year is doing very well. Southern Zambia is a drought disaster of note. So you have to know the market a lot better. And that's maybe where the government could also come in and get the people to understand the market, do their research and help with information, supply chain ideas and all that type of stuff. There's nothing wrong with, for example, a government putting a cold storage facility, say, in Harare, that its people can use to put their stuff there. I think you can do that under the current WTO rules.
Thank you, gentlemen. I think that was, from my point of view, a very interesting discussion, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. From me, Theo Foster, good day.
Nation in Conversation is proudly brought to you by Afgri, NJ, Grain SA, John Deere, Monsanto, Nedbank and Senves.